Hi y'all, welcome back to Mike Peace Woodturning. Today we're going to explore the world of ancillary tools to make your thread chasing easier. We're going to go beyond the basic thread chasers, which we've already covered, and look at some of the other tools. If you've been following along, you know that thread chasing is a traditional and very rewarding activity in wood turning, and there are some ancillary tools that can make your task a lot easier. So we're going to look at those in detail, some of which you can actually make yourself. First, let's look at some of those tools that we're going to use for creating a recess or a stop gap on the external, when we're cutting external threads. The stop gap is important because when we're threading, we're coming along. When we get to the back of the threads, if this thing stops while it's engaged, it's going to rip out the threads. So the way we deal with that is we put what we call a stop gap, and it's just basically a small gap wider than a little bit wider than one of the threads and maybe just a bit deeper. The simplest way is to use a 1/16 inch thin parting tool like this. And I tend to use this if I'm doing maybe 12 threads per inch, but for larger ones I tend to want to go up to a 1/8 inch parting tool, so it'll be just a little bit wider, and I'm using 12 threads per inch here. And that gives us time to, when we get to the end of the thread, we can actually disengage. I've pretty much retired this little guy since I've picked up my 16th inch Carter & Son thin parting tool. I prefer wooden handles, so I put a wooden handle on it, but because of that extra length, I just have so much more leverage than this. It just works a lot better for projects larger than 2 inches that require more leverage. Here are examples of recesses for the internal and in holly, and here's an internal and an external recess on Bradford pear. When I first got started in thread chasing about 12 years ago, I used an Allen wrench. This one, the handle is a little small, and I've since reground it to be a captive ring tool. Here's one a little bit larger. This works fairly well. It's got a little handle that's a little easier to keep it from torquing a little bit when you're doing that internal recess. This one was made out of an old hollow globe ornament hollower. It's high-speed steel, silver soldered onto a piece of carbon steel. This is okay for 20 threads per inch, a little small for most things. And I made these before I became familiar with the easy and relatively inexpensive availability of high-speed steel bars. You can find these on Amazon or eBay. Easy way to find them is click on the link in the under the description of my Amazon shop, and there'll be several choices of steel bars out there. This is 8mm or 5/16. This is 3/8. These can work basically. This 8mm is one that I had made this one from, and it's roughly configured or based on a design by Ashley Isles, and this works fairly well. But I decided I wanted one that was a little easier to have a flat surface against the tool rest, so it wouldn't torque. So I made one out of a heavier blank. Then I've since repurposed that to be a dovetail. Reinvented my dovetail scraper, and I had a smaller bar of high-speed steel on hand, so I redid this. This is 6x12 by 200mm, and this one works very well, and I use this for most any thread, 16 or 12 or even 10. Instead of making one for about $8 for a bar of high-speed steel, of course you can always pay big bucks and buy one. Alright, now let's talk about the controversial Armrest tool. This is a traditional tool that was used by turners for many years to give them extra support and versatility in using tools. An example would be not only in using the female recess, where they could actually manipulate this easily to change the up and down without having to resort to changing a tool rest, which back in the day might have been much more difficult to make adjustments than our modern day ones. but it'll also be used for hollowing tools or the inside-out tool, which we're going to be talking about shortly to use to help provide support and manipulate it. Let me read you a passage from Bill Jones' book, Notes from the Woodturning Shop. Bill was a fifth-generation ivory turner. He passed away a number of years ago, but I treasure his book, which I got used, and it's very difficult to come by now. It says, "Prejudice can undermine the best of tools simply because we aren't used to them. If you could grab a tool and do perfect work, the world would be full of fine craftsmen." He goes on to state that the armrest, which must be the easiest tool to reject as awkward and cumbersome, yet when mastered becomes such a good friend. So that's from his viewpoint. So I'm going to use the inside-out tool with the armrest. And I can adjust it easily on center. I can use it to support the tool and also pull the tool in. Now, I will often use a armrest for larger boxes, but I would agree with a lot of turners that for smaller items, it's not always necessary. It may be a personal preference, and a good example is if you have a fairly short thread and it's going into an open area where there's no recess, there's a lot of room back here for clearance, where basically once you bring the thread around, you're just going in and out without having to worry about bouncing it off. You don't need as much control from an outside source. You can just chase it down, especially when you're only doing about 3 threads or so. Another example where that is true is if you're turning a collar. This might have been mounted in a deep jaw. So let's say you're cutting a collar and it only has 2 or 3 threads, not typically the 5 or so that we typically start with in a box. And if you have it mounted in a chuck like this where you don't have to be concerned about hitting anything, this is all open space in there, it's just so much easier to just go straight in. And this particular collar has 1, 2, 3, 4 threads that are 10 threads per inch. But if you had a smaller collar with only 2 or 3 threads, it only takes just a few strikes to have that thread done, and you don't have to worry about the control at the bottom. You don't have to worry about being able to pull it in. So this is an example where you might not need an armrest. So people that are just making collars and external threads, for urns or hollow forms, yeah, they're less likely to want to use an armrest than someone that's turning larger vessels or boxes on the internal threads, where as you get deeper, the ability to pull it in helps. In Richard Raffin's book, Ton's Complete Illustrated Guide to Turning by Richard Raffin, he shows how you can easily make one of these by simply grinding away a carriage bolt. I used his illustration. I thought it was a great idea, and I ground away, but let me tell you, it took a lot of grinding. And then I realized when I went back and reevaluated a little bit, I should have used a much smaller carriage bolt. Richard, you should have used a smaller carriage bolt in your book as well. But a 1/4 inch, 5/16 inch carriage bolt, 7 to 9 inches long, is plenty adequate. And you're going to put it in a handle, so the whole thing is going to be about 19 inches long. Here's an example of one I bought from Robert Sorby, and frankly, it doesn't work any bit better than either one of these two do. It just costs more money. If you have more time than money, then make you one. If you've got more money than time, go ahead and buy you one if you feel like you need it. And here's another specialty tool. I've talked about it before in some of my box making videos, and that's using a point tool. It's simply a piece of 1/4 inch rod. It could be drill rod, but I prefer high-speed steel. This is a 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter, 6.5 millimeter. You can make them in 3/8 inch. They're easy to make. But the beauty of this, it's got three 3 sides on it, so you get a lot of use out of it as a scraper. But for box making, including thread chasing, it is so helpful for example, here's one test, for example, just facing off the face of the box. Again, I'm leaning it because it's a scraper. I've got the face coming down just a little bit. Surface here. Just about. The other thing it's useful for is when you've got your doing it inside and you have to make a little bit of a chamfer to start those threads, because when you come in with those threads, you know, if you got a sharp corner there, it's just going to go. So you have a chamfer at about 45 degrees, and that's what you start the thread on. And this is such an easy tool to make that chamfer with. Maybe a little less than 25. So it's a very handy tool for that. Okay, one of the last ancillary tools I want to talk about is a set of calipers. If you're only measuring the diameter and using it for comparing or checking, the lowly vernier caliper works fine. You know, if you're going to just transfer this to check it or something. But if you want precision, my suggestion is get you a digital one. And one of the nice things about it is when you get the size you want. Let's say you're measuring the inside of a female recess and you want to add an extra dimension for the male thread. All you got to do is zero it out and then come out and find out what that measurement is, and there you are. Dial calipers, I thought this would be better because it didn't use batteries, but it turns out you've got, dealing with all these numbers, I find to be a little more challenging to compare it, but it does have a similar feature where you can zero it out by turning the dial and use a similar feature to the other. It's just more of a manual approach, but this is so much easier. Okay, so if you hand thread chase threads, I'd appreciate you weighing in the comments below with anything you want to share. I'd be interested in knowing whether or not you use an armrest. What are your thoughts on that? And did you make or buy your recess tool? Remember, y'all stay safe and come on back, you hear?